At my son's wedding, I sat alone, pushed to the far corner. The bride told the photographer to keep me out of the family photos. My name wasn't even printed in full on the program. I stayed quiet, smiled, and waited. The next day, I closed my accounts, vanished from their lives, and rewrote my will. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The morning light spilled across the kitchen table, touching the rim of the teacup I had forgotten to drink from. The tea had long gone cold, but I didn't mind. My thoughts had a way of drifting, carrying me further than the warmth in that cup ever could. The small cottage I had called home for over 40 years stood quietly at the edge of town, its fading white fence bowing slightly under the years. The lavender rose beyond it still alive with fragrance. I tended them the way I tended everything else in my life, with devotion, with constancy, with the kind of care that rarely gets noticed, but makes everything around it grow. My name is Evelyn Mitchell. I am 76 years old, and for most of my life, I played the part so many women of my generation know too well. The dependable one, the fixer, the keeper of order in a house that might have otherwise collapsed. I was the one who made sure the roof never leaked, the fridge never emptied, and no one in my care ever felt the cold creeping in. I said yes even when yes cost me sleep, my body, my savings. Especially to my son, Daniel. He came into the world with a storm. I remember it as if it were stitched into my skin, thunder splitting the New Hampshire skate as I labored through the night. The nurses laughed then, saying a child who arrived with lightning at his back would live a dramatic life. They weren't wrong. Daniel grew quickly into his brilliance, sharp-eyed and ambitious, restless in a town too quiet for the size of his dreams. I wanted to give him every chance to chase those dreams. After my husband Al died when Daniel was only 12, there was no choice but to carry it all myself. Overnight, I went from a part-time elementary school teacher to a full-time provider, patching together whatever work I could find. Mornings in the classroom, evenings tutoring, summers spent cleaning houses or sewing repairs for neighbors. Every dollar folded carefully away, every shift endeared so Daniel's future might be wide and open. I don't recall those years with bitterness. They were heavy, yes, but the kind of heavy I believed was holy. Amile, the weight of love, the proof of motherhood. He never asked for much. He didn't need to. I gave freely, convinced that giving was the very language of love. His college tuition, his first apartment in Boston, the support after his divorce at 36, all of it came from the same well I kept filling, no matter how often it was emptied. When he succeeded, when he built a thriving consulting firm and earned in a month what I couldn't in a year, I felt nothing but pride. I never waited for repayment, never dreamed of keeping score. All I wanted was recognition, the simple kind, a thank you offered without attachment, a glance across the room that said, I remember what you did for me. But the truth about raising someone to stand tall is this: they sometimes forget who steadied their balance in the first place. That morning in my kitchen, with the sunlight making lace on the table, I thought of those years. I thought of Al, gone too soon, and of the nights I sat awake in the laundry room after Daniel had gone to sleep, wondering if I could stretch another week's groceries with what was left in my wallet. I thought of Daniel's laughter as a boy, wild and free, chasing through the lavender rows without a single thought of how much work it took to keep those rows alive. Time makes memories sharper, not softer. It cuts closer as the years go by. What once felt like sacrifice had begun to feel like silence, because unacknowledged love eventually becomes invisible. And invisible things, people trip over them like they aren't even there. I stared at my untouched tea and felt the weight of that truth. For years, I had lived in the background of Daniel's story, steady and constant, and I had told myself that was enough, that a mother didn't need recognition to matter. But recognition, I now understood, was the soil that kept love rooted. Without it, even the strongest love could feel like air, unheld, unseen. Outside my window, the lavender shifted in the breeze, a sea of purple and green swaying gently, alive because I never stopped tending it. I wondered if Daniel even remembered those summers, barefoot, sunburned, his laughter carrying across the fence. I wondered if he remembered me watching from the porch, a glass of lemonade sweating in my hand, pride swelling so fiercely it hurt. The years had been long, and still I had carried him, not with my arms anymore, but with my choices. And yet, somewhere along the way, the line between mother and ghost blurred. That morning, I told myself something I had never dared admit out loud. Giving without being seen doesn't make you noble. It makes you disappear. And I was tired of disappearing. The phone rang just after dinner, its sound breaking the hush of the evening. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, the smell of roasted chicken still clinging to the air, and lifted the receiver. Daniel's voice filled the line, brisk but bright, carrying that particular edge I knew so well, the one he used whenever he wanted something. "Mom," he said, "I have news. I'm getting married." For a heartbeat I froze, dish towel clenched between my fingers. The words took their time settling in, heavy but gilded, like confetti falling too slowly. Married again. He spoke her name quickly, like I ought to know it already. Rebecca Carter. He barely paused before launching into details, his tone animated, youthful in a way I hadn't heard in years. "She's amazing," he said, excitement bubbling through the line. "Really organized, planning everything down to the last detail. We found the perfect place, Maplewood Estate. You'd love it. Gardens everywhere. Rebecca's dream venue." I pictured him smiling as he spoke, the same eager expression he wore as a boy when asking for something just out of reach. And just as I had done then, I braced for the ask. "Mom, the deposit's a little steep," he added, hesitation slipping into his voice. "If you could help cover most of it, I promise I'll pay you back." That promise, so familiar, so often unfulfilled. Of course he wouldn't. And of course I said yes anyway. I wired $20,000 that afternoon. A few days later, another 18. After that, the numbers blurred together. Florists, caterers, an open bar, a tent for the lawn. Each request dressed up as though it were small, reasonable. Each time I transferred the money without protest, telling myself it was for connection, for closeness, for a chance to be needed again. For a little while, I almost believed it worked. Daniel called more often, his voice light, the distance between us bridged with talk of cake flavors and seating charts. He sent photos of table linens, asked my opinion on centerpieces, included me in the flow of decisions in a way that felt new. Then the invitation arrived in the mail, an envelope thick with gold lettering, my name written neatly across the front. Not a text, not an email, but a real card. I held it in my hands as though it were a sign that perhaps my years of giving had finally earned me a place in the story again. That night, I laid out my pearl earrings, the ones Al had given me on our 25th anniversary. I pressed them against my palm, remembering his steady voice when he told me I was his anchor, his quiet light. I imagined standing at the reception, raising a glass, speaking words that would warm the room and remind Daniel of everything we had survived together. For the first time in years, I let myself dream of being seen. But the truth doesn't always arrive in one blow. Sometimes it comes in fragments, in the smallest of omissions. The first time I noticed it was when I wasn't invited to the florist's appointment. I had paid for the blooms, thousands of dollars wired without hesitation. But my opinion was never sought. "We've got it covered," Rebecca said sweetly, her voice bright like a commercial. "Thank you so much for helping us make Maplewood magical." Her tone was polite, flawless even, but not once did she ask how I was. Not once did she say she looked forward to me being part of the day. Gratitude slipped from her like a rehearsed line, a transaction. Nothing more. I brushed it aside, telling myself not to read too deeply. Mothers of sons learn this discipline, the art of swallowing small hurts, so as not to appear needy. But the cracks widen. Daniel spoke of costs more than people, of upgrades more than meaning. Signature cocktails, premium bands, custom napkins. Each conversation ended with a figure, each figure followed by silence until I filled it with yes. Every transfer of money felt less like generosity and more like insurance. Insurance against invisibility. When the guest list surfaced, he texted me casually. "Mom, anyone you want to invite?" Anyone I want to invite, as though I were a neighbor offered a courtesy, not his mother. I gave him two names, Martha and June, my only friends left from church. He responded with a brief, Cool. Might be tight on space, but we'll figure it out. And then nothing more. A week later, I asked if I might visit Maplewood before the rehearsal to see the gardens, to feel part of what I was helping to build. Daniel hesitated, his words careful. Surely the planner thinks it'll be too chaotic. Best if you just come for the ceremony. You've helped enough, Mom. Just relax and enjoy. Helped enough. Streamlined. Words that stung sharper than rejection. I heard in them what he didn't say, that I was clutter, an extra piece to keep tidy and out of the way. That night, I cried quietly in the laundry room, the same place I used to sit decades ago when Al was gone and Daniel needed everything I didn't know how to give. Tears had a way of finding me there, where no one else could see, where my grief and my sacrifice lived together in silence. Outside, the lavender bent in the wind. Inside, I felt myself bending too. Each wire transfer, each omission, each clipped phrase from Rebecca or Daniel chipped away at me. And though I stayed silent, I began to understand that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it is the sound of someone slowly vanishing. It started with the smallest exclusions, the kind you could almost ignore if you wanted to believe you still belonged. But 1,000 small cuts can break a body just as surely as one deep wound. The florist appointment passed without me. Rebecca had chosen every bloom, every garland, without asking the woman who had wired thousands to make them possible. "We've got it covered," she chirped over the phone, her tone rehearsed, sugar-polished. "You are wonderful for helping us, Evelyn. Maplewood is going to be perfect." Her words were smooth, yet I felt the distance in them, like a velvet rope quietly placed between us. Gratitude wrapped in plastic, meant to shine for a moment before being tossed aside. Then came the calls from Daniel. They were more frequent now, but lighter, thinner, filled with details that seemed less like sharing and more like reciting. "Rebecca booked the band. We're adding a dessert bar. Oh, by the way, Mom, the photographer's package is a little higher than we thought. Could you wire another 5,000? His voice was cheerful, almost boyish, as if money grew as easily as lavender in my garden. Each time I said yes, not because I didn't feel the sting, but because no felt like it might sever the fragile thread still holding us together. But threads, once pulled too tight, begin to fray. The first true crack appeared with the seating chart. He texted me late one evening, casual as ever. "Hey, Mom, Rebecca's finalizing the guest list. Anyone you want to invite?" The words hit me with the coldness of a form letter. I thought of Martha and June, my only two steady companions from church, women who had held me up through lonely holidays and quiet birthdays. I typed their names and sent them to him, expecting at least the courtesy of reassurance. Instead, his reply was curt. "Cool. Might be tight on space, but we'll figure it out." And that was it. No warmth, no promise, no guarantee. I set the phone down on the table, staring at the lavender swaying outside the window. My reflection in the glass looked hollow, like a figure fading from its own life. The next week, I asked if I might visit Maplewood before the rehearsal. I longed to see the gardens, to step into the space my sacrifices had built. Maybe I thought standing there would anchor me back into the story. Daniel paused, then spoke with the same clipped tone that carried more weight than he realized. "Mom, the planner says it'll be too chaotic. Better if you just come for the ceremony. You've done enough. Just relax and enjoy the day." You've done enough. The words struck like ice. Not thank you. Not we couldn't have done this without you. Just a gentle dismissal, as if my place had been fulfilled before the vows were even spoken. That night, I hid in the laundry room, the place where I had wept years ago after Al died, when Daniel was 12 and needed everything at once. My tears then had been born of exhaustion, of a love stretched too thin. But these tears came from something sharper. The realization that I was no longer part of the center, only the scenery, invisible but expected to pay the bills, present but never quite included. The invitations went out, embossed with gold lettering. When mine arrived, my name was shortened to E. Mitchell. No Evelyn, no mother, just an initial, stripped of history, stripped of meaning. When I held it in my hands, it felt less like an invitation and more like a receipt. The cracks widened, but I swallowed the pain, practicing the silence mothers are trained to carry. Yet deep down, something shifted. Not broken, Not yet, but fractured enough to know the story was slipping away from me. Viewers, maybe you felt it too, the slow erasure, the steady push to the sidelines of a life you helped build. Maybe you've said yes so many times that no longer feels possible, as though silence is the only thing keeping the connection alive. But what happens when silence no longer protects you, when it becomes the very tool that erases you? Stay with me, because the day I walked into Maplewood, dressed and ready to see my son marry, was the day those cracks shattered into something I could never mend. The silver dress had been waiting on the back of my closet door for a week. Soft chiffon, pale as morning light, its sleeves long enough to cover the creases in my arms, its collar high enough to remind me I was still dignified. I paired it with the pearl pendant Daniel had given me when he graduated college, back when he looked at me with pride, when he still believed I was the reason he had made it that far. The night before the wedding, I didn't sleep. I folded napkins that didn't need folding, rearranged photographs that had hung in place for decades, and brewed bout tea I never drank. The house was silent, but my thoughts roared. Where would they place me? Not just at the reception, but in Daniel's life. Was there still room for me at the center, or had I already been pushed to the edge? The morning cab arrived at 9. Maplewood Estate was only 20 minutes away, but I asked the driver to take the long route, past the lake Daniel once ran around barefoot, past the places that hadn't changed even though everything else had. When we pulled into the gravel drive, I knew at once I was too early. Chairs were still being set out, flowers strung across the arbor, staff buzzing like bees around the gardens I had paid to fill. A young man with a clipboard approached. "Are you with the wedding team?" he asked politely. "No," I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm the groom's mother." His smile tightened, as though he hadn't been expecting that answer. He led me inside to a side room, a library with tall windows overlooking the fountain. "You can rest here," he said. A holding space, that much was clear. A place to keep me out of the way. 15 minutes later, the planner appeared, clipboard pressed against her chest like a shield. "Mrs. Mitchell, you look lovely today. The ceremony begins at 11:30. We'll escort you to your seat at 11:15. I nodded. "And my seat, where exactly will that be?" She hesitated before replying him. "Table 9 near the garden doors. Wonderful view of the lake." "Not with Daniel?" Her eyes dropped briefly. "The head table is for the couple, the bridal party, and the bride's parents. There wasn't enough room to include everyone." Not enough room. I had paid for nearly everything, and yet there wasn't enough room for me. At 11, I slipped outside, moving through the gardens. Guests were beginning to arrive, their laughter ringing out as they admired the roses flown in from California with money I had wired. Their perfume was sweet, but the air around me tasted bitter. "Evelyn," a voice chimed behind me. Rebecca. She looked radiant, like she had stepped out of a bridal magazine. Beaded gown, veil cascading like cathedral glass, makeup flawless as though crafted for the lens. Her smile was polite but brittle, as if every expression had been practiced in a mirror. "I'm glad you're here," she said, her tone too bright. "Just so you know, the photographer will focus mostly on bridal party and immediate family. We want a clean aesthetic." "I am immediate family," I replied softly. Her smile thinned but didn't break. "Of course, we just want everything streamlined." Streamlined, clean aesthetic, words that sliced deeper than if she'd simply said what she meant, that I was clutter. I didn't argue, I only nodded and returned to the library. When they finally escorted me to my seat, I found myself in the front row, far right, alone. Not with Daniel, not with Rebecca's family, not with anyone I knew. The program resting on my chair bore the names of both sets of parents, but mine was shortened, faceless. Mother of the groom, E. Mitchell. No Evelyn, no history, no place. The ceremony began, the music swelling. Daniel appeared at the end of the aisle, tall, polished, every inch the successful man I had raised him to be. My chest ached with pride and grief at once. I wanted to wave, to catch his eye, the way I once had during his school plays, but he never looked my way. His eyes stayed fixed on Rebecca, waiting for her to join him. The vows were spoken. The crowd cheered, and I clapped softly, my hands moving as though underwater. Around me, joy bloomed like wildfire, but I stood outside it, as though watching someone else's life unfold. After the ceremony, I drifted toward the cocktail area, hoping to find Keith, my grandson. I longed for at least one face that still recognized me. That was when the photographer approached, her camera swinging at her side. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said gently. "Would you mind stepping back a little? We're trying to keep the frame focused on immediate family." "I'm the groom's mother," I whispered. She faltered, glancing toward the bridal party. "Of course, but the couple requested a clean visual, minimal distractions." Minimal distractions. That was what I had become. Before I could respond, Daniel appeared. His jaw was tight, his steps quick. He leaned in close, speaking under his breath. "Mom, could you head inside for a while? Rebecca's a little tense. It would help." I looked at him, really looked. This was the boy I had cradled through fevers, the man I had lifted through heartbreak, the son I had given nearly $40,000 so he could have this day. And he was asking me to disappear. "Where should I go?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The library," he said. "Veronica will bring you some tea." Tea, as though I were being soothed with small comforts while erased from the center of my own son's life. "I won't make a scene," I said finally. "Thank you," he replied, his relief plain, as though I were just another problem solved. I walked slowly toward the estate, each step pressing heavier into the stones beneath my heels. Inside, I paused at the gift table. My silver envelope still rested there, tied neatly with ribbon. Inside was a check for $5,000, a honeymoon gift. Quietly, I slipped it into my purse. No one noticed. No one stopped me. Back in the library, I sat by the tall window, watching the reception unfold on the lawn below. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, their joy ringing out like bells. They looked complete, like a family, and not a single one of them noticed that the groom's mother was absent. The moment I slipped the silver envelope into my purse, I knew something had shifted. It wasn't rebellion and it wasn't revenge. It was clarity. I had been erased in plain sight, and I couldn't unsee it. Back in the library, I sat by the window as the music swelled outside. Guests raised champagne flutes, laughter spilling across the gardens I had paid for, while I sat alone with a cup of tea that had already gone cold. Every sound from the lawn pressed against the glass, distant, muffled, as though I were listening to a celebration that didn't belong to me. I thought of Al then, my husband, gone so many years but still steady in memory. After Daniel's first birthday party, I had worked myself to exhaustion, cooking, decorating, cleaning until my body ached. No one noticed. They simply ate, laughed, and left. When the house finally grew quiet, Al sat on the kitchen floor beside me and said, "Sweetheart, people get used to your giving so quickly. They start to think your sacrifices are just scenery." That was what I had become here. Scenery. Not a mother, not a presence, just background. I stood and touched the necklace at my throat, Daniel's gift from college graduation, once a symbol of gratitude, now a weight I could hardly bear. Outside, he and Rebecca posed for photos, their smiles polished and shining. The photographer never turned my way. Without a word, I gathered my clutch and walked out. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I passed the gift table again, my steps steady, and kept moving until I reached the gravel drive. The cab driver raised his eyebrows when I slid into the back seat. "Heading home already?" "No," I said softly. "Heading forward." The ride back was quiet, the world outside painted with sunlight and water. Ducks paddled along the lake, children tossed stones into rippling waves, and the air smelled of summer. For the first time in years, I breathed without choking on expectation. At home, I placed the necklace in its velvet box and slid it to the back of the drawer. Then I made a fresh cup of tea, hot this time, and sat at the table where I had once dreamed of giving a toast at my son's wedding. Instead, I sipped in silence, calm and steady. Something inside me had broken. Yes, but something else had been released. I pulled out my checkbook and traced every transfer I had made in the last 3 months. The venue deposit, the florist, the caterer, the band, the string quartet I never heard play. $38,450. Money gone, but not wasted. It had bought me the truth. Daniel had not forgotten me by accident. He had chosen convenience over recognition, silence over gratitude, and I had let him, but not anymore. The next day I drove to my lawyer's office, the same man who had handled Al's will. I sat across from him, my hands steady as I told him I wanted to make changes. Remove Daniel as executor and beneficiary, establish a scholarship instead for local girls who've lost a parent. Let them carry something forward. It felt clean, purposeful, as though I were finally giving it without erasing myself in the process. Later that evening, I pulled an old suitcase from the linen closet. Inside went a few cardigans, 2 pairs of jeans, walking shoes, and a novel I had never finished. From the hall closet, I retrieved a small box labeled emergency cash, saved across decades. Some women prepared for earthquakes. I had prepared for the day I might need to disappear quietly. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't leave a note. I didn't call Daniel to explain. I simply packed, locked the house, and drove. The road carried me north, away from the silence that had swallowed me whole. Hours later, I reached a coastal village I hadn't visited since Daniel was in high school. A small inn stood near the water, its signs swinging gently in the breeze. The woman who greeted me introduced herself as Nora, her smile kind, but without questions. "Do you have a room?" I asked. "I have one better," she replied. "A room with peace and no expectations." I smiled. It was exactly what I needed. That night, I walked the beach alone. The moon poured silver over the ocean, wrapping the world in quiet forgiveness. I slipped off my shoes and let the cold waves kiss my feet. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Not because someone had seen me, but because I had. Viewers, maybe you've known this moment too. The point when staying feels heavier than leaving. When silence no longer protects you, but suffocates you. If you've ever carried the weight of being unseen, I want you to stay with me. Because walking away was only the beginning, and what came next changed everything. The first message came 3 days after the wedding. Daniel's voice spilled through my voicemail, clipped and careful, trying not to sound worried. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you since the wedding. Hope you're good. Give me a call when you'll get this." I didn't answer. The phone stayed on the nightstand beside the bed in the little room at Nora's Inn, but I let it ring. I let the silence stand where my words had always filled the gaps. By the end of the week, a second message arrived. "Mom, it's me again. I stopped by the house." No one answered. The lights were off. "Miss Langston, the neighbor, said she hasn't seen you since last week. You okay?" His tone was sharper now, nervous but not panicked, like a man who had misplaced something he assumed would always be where he left it. Still, I didn't respond. The silence unsettled him. I knew it would. For decades, I had been the one to reach out, to check in, to smooth things over before they cracked. Birthdays remembered with cards, anniversaries marked with calls, casseroles delivered when he was low, money transferred when he asked for help. I had been the constant. He had grown used to that rhythm, and now the music had stopped. Rebecca sent a message soon after. "Hi, Evelyn. Hope you're doing well. Daniel's been a little worried. Let us know if you need anything." Polite, polished, impersonal. I could almost hear the rehearsed cadence behind the words. Still, I ignored it. My absence was not cruelty, it was clarity. Daniel called again 5 days later. "Okay, Mom, I don't know what's going on, but it's weird now. Your car's gone, the house is locked. Caitlin," he stopped, corrected himself quickly. "Rebecca says the envelope from the gift table is missing. Did you take it? I don't understand." "No, son, you don't understand," I thought, my hands folded quietly in my lap. You never learned to see the people you loved unless they were offering something. I spent that afternoon sitting by the harbor. The fishing boats rocked gently, ropes creaking against the tide. Nora brought me tea in a chipped blue mug, her presence steady but unintrusive. Later, she came to my room carrying the inn's phone. "There's a man calling for you," she said softly. "He says he's your son." The phone rang once, twice. Daniel's voice came faint through the receiver, muffled by distance. I stared at it, then at the horizon beyond the window, the sky painted with gold, and I let it ring until the sound faded. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't anger. It was simply the truth. I had nothing left to explain. Meanwhile, the world I had left behind began to unravel. Daniel drove by my house again, tried the spare key hidden in the lantern by the garage. Inside, the air was stale, untouched. Mail still unopened on the counter, coffee mug clean, and waiting on the rack, closets half empty. On the wall where his high school graduation photo had hung, only the nail remained. That absence, more than anything, hit him hardest. He went to the bank, searching for answers. The teller confirmed my accounts had been closed. The money moved elsewhere. He sat in his car afterward, staring into the rearview mirror at his own reflection, the unease growing heavier. Rebecca dismissed it. "She's trying to make you feel guilty," she insisted. "This is emotional manipulation." But Daniel rubbed his temples, shaking his head. "No, this doesn't feel like guilt. This feels like she's done." 2 weeks later, a letter found its way to Nora's mailbox. It was written on plain white paper, the handwriting uneven, rushed. "I guess I didn't realize how much you did until you stopped doing it. I'm sorry if the wedding hurt you. I didn't mean for it to go that way. I just thought you'd always be there." I folded it and slipped it into my journal, beside the list I had made the night after the wedding, the list of things I had given him without being asked. The letter wasn't an apology, not really. It was an acknowledgement born from absence, the first time my silence had spoken louder than my sacrifice. At dusk, I walked down the dock and watched the fishermen return. They greeted each other with tired smiles, no need for explanations, no words wasted. They knew what it meant to endure something hard, and now they rested. That was what I was doing, resting, finally, after a lifetime of carrying weight no one noticed until it was gone. For the first time, I was not waiting for the phone to ring. For the first time, silence felt like freedom. Freedom didn't arrive with fanfare. It came quietly, like a tide creeping in overnight, reshaping the shoreline before anyone noticed. 3 weeks into my stay at Nora's Inn, I stopped counting the days. The mornings belonged to the sea breeze drifting through the screened porch, to the sound of gulls crying above the harbor, to the simple joy of pouring coffee just the way I liked it, strong with a dash of cinnamon. No one asked me for anything. No one measured my worth in wire transfers or favors. My life was finally mine, and it startled me how light it felt. I began painting again, something I hadn't done since Daniel was a boy. Back then, I'd put away the brushes because there was always something more important to do. Soccer practices, parent-teacher meetings, double shifts at the school. But now, with the ocean as my witness, I picked up a brush and pressed color onto canvas. Not perfect strokes, not polished art, just what I felt. Sea rocks, windowsills, old hands holding daisies. Messy, uneven, but mine. One afternoon, Nora peeked over my shoulder. "That's beautiful, Evelyn," she said. I laughed softly. "It's messy." "Maybe," she shrugged, "but it's yours." Her words lingered longer than she knew. For decades, everything I gave belonged to someone else. This finally belonged to me. At Nora's suggestion, I rented a table at the weekend market. I laid out 6 of my little paintings beside a basket of oatmeal cookies I'd baked the night before. I didn't expect much, but a little girl tugged her father over, pointing at a painting of wrinkled hands holding a flower. "She's smiling like Grandma," the girl whispered. He bought it on the spot. By noon, 4 paintings were gone, the cookies sold out, and I had been invited to display my work at the local gallery's open wall next month. I carried the empty basket back to the inn, stunned. My life had never been about selling art, but that wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that strangers saw worth in something I created without obligation. At night, I wrote in a blue linen journal I'd bought from the bookstore in town. I didn't write for Daniel or for anyone else. I wrote to give shape to the years I had spent invisible. I wrote about giving without recognition, about love mistaken for duty, about the quiet death of being erased from the story you helped build. Across one page in bold letters, I scrawled, "My worth is not determined by how much I'm needed." I underlined it twice, letting the truth sink into me. The days unfolded slowly, each one carrying me further from the woman I used to be. I joined an oil painting class at the community center, led by a spry instructor named Valerie. On the first INMA, she gave us only one rule: paint what you feel, not what they expect. Her words struck me like a bell, ringing through the hollow places I had ignored for years. One morning, I caught my reflection in a shop window as I walked down the boardwalk with paint smudges on my hands and a tote bag slung over my shoulder. I looked older, yes, but lighter too. Not a woman waiting by the phone. Not someone measured only by usefulness. Just Evelyn. Daniel's letters trickled in, his words shifting from confusion to regret. I read them, folded them neatly, and placed them in my journal. They were not unanswered out of cruelty. They were unanswered because for once my story wasn't about him. Life here was not grand, not dramatic, but it was mine, steady as the tide. On Sundays, I walked the beach with a thermos of tea, sketching shells and footprints that would be gone by evening. Temporary things, fleeting things, yet still worth noticing. They reminded me of myself, not invisible, not erased, just unclaimed until now. Viewers, maybe you've been here too, caught between the life you gave away and the life you long to reclaim. Maybe you've poured yourself out so completely that you forgot what it felt like to simply exist without asking permission. If so, keep listening. Because this rebirth, this quiet claiming of self, is only the beginning. And what it taught me changed everything. The letters kept coming, their envelopes stacked neatly on my nightstand. Daniel's handwriting had changed over the years. Once bold, now cramped, as though every word carried weight he didn't know how to bear. The first few were filled with explanations, his sentences rushing across the page, trying to patch holes with apologies that never reached the marrow. I didn't mean for you to feel left out. Rebecca and I were just overwhelmed. I should have made more space. Each line circled around the same truth he could not name. That space for me had never been a priority until it was gone. Weeks later, the tone shifted. His words slowed, softened. I drove past the house again. It doesn't look right without you. The garden's overgrown. The lavender's fading. I don't think I realized how much life you poured into everything. That letter stayed in my hands long after the ink had blurred beneath my fingertips. I thought of the lavender bending under summer storms, of the way its scent lingered even as its petals fell. Life poured into something that outlasted the pouring. Perhaps that was all any of us could hope for. Rebecca wrote once more too, a single card with her name signed in tight script. Daniel's been restless. He misses you. I know things were complicated, but he talks about you every night. The words were polite, practiced, stripped of warmth. I placed her card beneath Daniel's stack and left it there, flat and silent. Here in the village, life had taken on a rhythm I hadn't known I craved. Mornings began with the salt wind rolling through open windows. Afternoons belonged to the market, where I sold a few small paintings and listened to strangers speak of their families with laughter that didn't sting. Evenings ended with tea on the porch, the horizon melting into orange and violet. At the gallery's open wall event, I displayed a canvas of two hands letting go of a rope. The background was storm gray, the hands painted in tones of blue and umber, knuckles tight but opening. People stopped, studied, nodded. One woman touched her chest and whispered, "That's what it feels like." I didn't need to ask what she meant. We had lived the same kind of story in different houses. Later, when I walked home through the quiet streets, I realized the ache inside me had shifted. It was still there, yes, but softer now, no longer raw. The silence I carried was not emptiness. It was space, room for my own breath, my own becoming. Back at the inn, Nora joined me on the porch. She poured herself a glass of wine and tilted her head toward the sky. "You've changed since you arrived," she said. "How so?" "You were folded in on yourself at first, like someone who expected to be overlooked. Now," she smiled, "now you take up space. Quietly, but fully." Her words startled me, not because they weren't true, but because no one had ever spoken them aloud. I had been useful, dependable, generous, but never simply present. The lavender Daniel wrote about would wither soon, and the house would stand without me. Perhaps he would sell it one day, erase the walls I had painted, replace the garden with new grass. That thought no longer filled me with despair. I had planted enough seasons to know that nothing lasted forever. What mattered was that I had been there, that life had bloomed for as long as I tended it. Some evenings, I wondered if Daniel would ever find his way to me, If one day he would step off a bus in this small coastal town, letter in his pocket, apology on his lips. Perhaps he would, perhaps he wouldn't. Either way, I was no longer waiting by the window. Instead, I filled the journal with stories, memories of Al's steady voice, of Daniel's laughter as a boy, of the quiet resilience I had never given myself credit for. I wrote about the cost of being unseen and the greater gift of finally seeing yourself. On the final page of one entry, I wrote, "I am no longer missing, I am here." When I closed the book, the night air wrapped around me like a shawl. The sea whispered against the rocks below, eternal and untamed. I lifted my face to the wind, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like background. I felt like the story itself. Autumn settled over the village with a gentleness I hadn't expected. The air turned crisp, the sea darker, its waves heavier, and yet there was a comfort in the shift. Life was moving forward, and I was moving with it. One morning, Nora handed me an envelope with my name written across it. The handwriting was Daniel's, unmistakable, though the lines trembled as if each stroke had cost him something. I carried it to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, the morning light spilling across the quilt. For a long moment, I didn't open it. The stack of his other letters remained unread on the nightstand, folded away like unanswered prayers. But something about this envelope felt different, heavier. I slipped a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the paper. "Mom," it began, "I don't know how to write this. I've been trying for weeks. The house feels hollow without you." Rebecca and I argued about it, but I told her this isn't about guilt or manipulation. It's about me finally realizing how much I asked of you and how little I gave back. I didn't see it then, but I do now. At the wedding, when you weren't there in the photos, when the photographer looked around and you weren't by my side, it hit me. Something was missing, and it wasn't the flowers or the band. It was you. I made you invisible. And you let me because that's what you've always done, but I don't want that silence anymore. I don't want to lose you completely. If you never come back, I'll understand. But if there's still a way to see you, even just once, tell me where. I'll come, no expectations. Just me, your son, asking for his mother back. The words blurred as my eyes filled. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the weight of being seen at last. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to undo years of neglect, but it was something. I folded the letter and placed it inside my journal, pressed between pages where I had written of silence, of erasure, of rebirth. It belonged there, not as a promise, but as a marker. Proof that absence had spoken louder than sacrifice ever could. That evening I walked the beach. The tide was low, leaving behind the small pools where starfish clung to rocks and children collected shells. The wind tangled my hair, but I didn't smooth it down. I let it whip free, wooled untamed. In the distance, the lighthouse flickered on, steady and resolute, its beams sweeping across the water. I thought of Daniel's letter, of the boy he had once been, the man he was becoming. Perhaps he would come here. Perhaps he wouldn't. The truth was, I no longer needed the answer. My life no longer hinged on his recognition. I stopped at the edge of the water and pressed my feet into the sand, grounding myself. I had given, I had lost, and I had walked away. But I had also found a voice, a canvas, a life that belonged entirely to me. The sea roared softly, the sky deepened into indigo, and I whispered into the wind, "I am here." And for the first time, I knew it was enough. Viewers, maybe you've carried that same silence. Maybe you've given until you disappeared. But hear me now. Your worth is not measured by how much you're needed or how much you give. It is measured by your being, your breath, your presence. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever had to reclaim your own life. And don't forget, your voice matters too.